everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. Still working on that deep dive for all of you, so this will be another one of my shorter videos, but it's still going to include a lot of details, and this one is very interesting. But before we get into the video, I want to thank our sponsor for today. I've been working with PDS Debt for a few months now, and I'm continuing to hear the same feedback. What I've been hearing is that people wish they would have looked into something like this way sooner, and I can totally relate. I'm sure you know that finances are a stressful topic for a lot of us, and I am not an expert. I'm just coming to you as a friend, and I know firsthand that sometimes it's just easier to ignore it. If you are ignoring your debt, it's very likely that you're missing out on thousands of dollars you could be saving in interest and monthly payments with PDS Debt, because I know I was. This is not something I really took seriously or understood until I was over my head. The cool thing is that PDS Debt, once again, is giving all of you a free debt savings breakdown just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment. I'm doing it right here at pdsdebt.com/Kim. It's pdsdebt.com/KIM, and you'll receive a full breakdown of all the interest you shouldn't be paying each month and multiple options on how they can help you get rid of it. I personally like PDS Debt because they have customized zero interest options for anyone that's struggling with credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, and collection accounts. I hated knowing that I had things in collections. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low, zero interest monthly payment. So it's very easy to stay on track and be organized and get that debt down. Anyone with over $10,000 in debt qualifies. There's no minimum credit score required. Bad credit and fair credit are accepted. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balance is not going down, this program is for you. PDS Debt can help you pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. Just complete this quick and easy debt assessment at pdsdebt.com. And once again, that's pdsdebt.com/KIM, and take back your financial freedom. Once again, I want to thank PDS Debt for making this video possible, and all of you for supporting this brand who has been supporting me and my channel. Now, let's get into the video. I want to introduce you to Wendy Ann Twice. She was born on June 25th, 1952, into a well-to-do family in the suburbs of Connecticut on the New England coast. Wendy's parents were both teachers. They were able to provide everything she needed or wanted. But although she lived a pretty privileged, middle-class life, Wendy was always yearning for something more. People close to her described her as a wannabe flower child, essentially a hippie, and an overall lover of the 60s. She was a bit of a rebellious teenager. She would stay out late at night, and sometimes she wouldn't even come home at all. She was also experimenting with drugs. When Wendy was only 17 years old, she left high school, and that is when her life started to spiral out of control. She ended up vanishing. Her family searched for her everywhere. It was terrifying knowing that she could be all alone, or worse, she could be injured or even dead. Soon, her family would understand her familiar yet very peculiar and unsettling patterns. When Wendy's parents finally found her, she was living in a tent in New Hampshire, and they could tell that she wasn't acting like herself. She was out of control, unstable, and they feared that she could end up in an even worse situation. So as hard as it was, they decided to admit her to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors believed that she may have been suffering from drug-induced bipolar. There was this pattern of mental health issues that plagued Wendy. Her family witnessed this for a while. Wendy had displayed symptoms like those of bipolar condition throughout her entire life, but they seemed to have gotten much worse. One clue that something was definitely wrong is that Wendy began writing bizarre letters to herself and her family. Her family would try to decipher what these letters meant, but they were confusing. It was almost as though they were written by somebody else. They knew that Wendy authored them because she was alone. They couldn't have been written by anyone else. That's kind of scary, right? I'd be thinking, wow, this person may be out of their mind in one way or another, but you care about them. You only want the best, but if you're not a professional and only a loved one, what can you do? The letters themselves didn't even make sense to the family, and even more concerning and confusing was the fact that she began signing them with another name. Yes, and I found this to be one of the most interesting parts of this case. It's what drew me in. I've never researched a case with themes like the ones connected to Wendy and her life. I'm intrigued by her, truly. Although some may see her actions as merely psychological issues with an unstable mental health condition, it's not that black and white for me. As much as I understand how important it is to have a medical diagnosis, I see Wendy's characteristics as unique, something that sets her apart and makes her special, and I wanted to get to know her more. I'm sure there was a lot of judgment set forth against Wendy. It's hard not to judge things that we don't understand or experience in our own lives. But I ask you to be open-minded and sensitive to the fact that we all have flaws. We're all dealing with our own demons, so to speak. Wendy's just happened to have a name, Shauna. It's important for me to introduce you to Shauna, Wendy's alter ego or possible dual personality. Shauna was the real wild child. But before I really dive into all that, let me tell you what was happening in Wendy's life by the time she turned 18. She was still living at the facility that her parents checked her into. However, once she turned 18, she was able to make her own decisions. She decided to refuse any further treatment. She checked herself out and disappeared from her family once again. She didn't keep in contact with her family at all. No phone calls, no letters, no sign that she was safe or okay. It's typical for individuals suffering with certain types of mental health conditions to refuse therapy or medication because they don't think they have anything wrong with them. Their world is familiar to them, whereas the people around them can see this profound difference between what we generally see as normal and what is not. Wendy wandered around doing her own thing in her own world, or probably in both her and Shauna's world for a couple of years. I can't imagine as a parent not knowing where my child was. About 2 years later, Wendy showed back up at her parents' house in Connecticut, telling them that she had been trying to escape an abusive relationship. This homecoming didn't last very long. In a very short time, she was gone once again, and this time for much longer. Actually, her family didn't see her or hear from her until she was 25 years old in 1978. To make ends meet, Wendy was working as a hotel maid in Reno. She moved there to try to escape this ex that had been treating her badly. It isn't clear whether this is the same ex she was running from when she returned to her family, but this boyfriend ended up finding her in Reno. He was stalking her, and one particular day, this ex-boyfriend became enraged. He was following her around, and then he pushed her into an alley and proceeded to beat her up. This is where Danae Rattay comes into the picture, Wendy's knight in shining armor. Danae protected Wendy. He scared off the ex-boyfriend, and in her mind, he saved her life. Danae was from Hearst in Northern Ontario. He was the opposite of Wendy. His upbringing was quite different. His family wasn't well off, and while Wendy grew up being raised by 2 teachers, Danae couldn't read or write. He was in the mining industry working the gold and copper mines. This was hard labor. It was grueling work. And he would travel to places like Las Vegas on his off time to relax and do one of his favorite things, gambling. I found that interesting because his day job is trying to strike gold while his R&R is trying to hit the jackpot. Danae prided himself on his poker playing abilities, and he won quite frequently. So you see, he may not have been able to read books, but he knew how to read people, which helped him know when to hold or fold. Maybe his knack for reading people helped him read Wendy that day, because when he stepped in to help her, the moment she set eyes on him for the very first time, they said that they knew they were meant to be together. However, there was a language barrier. He spoke French and he knew very little English, and needless to say, they had a hard time communicating, but that didn't stop them from taking a chance on each other. When it came time for Danae to leave Reno, Wendy told him she wanted to go with him. please take her along. It wasn't long before the couple decided that they wanted to get married. Wendy wanted her family to be involved, so she took Danae back home to meet them. They were actually ecstatic to see that she had found someone to possibly help her be reined in and to settle down. They were amazed at the story of him coming to her rescue. The two had a small wedding in Connecticut, and they both looked amazing. I did find some pictures, so I'm going to put them up on the screen. Friends described Danae as looking like a guy from Saturday Night Fever, and Wendy looking like a hippie Pocahontas. I can see it. Once they were hitched, the couple moved back to Danae's home in northern Canada. This is where he had a job at Uranium City working in the mines. Even though his job was physically taxing on Danae, he liked having that steady income. The first couple years of their marriage were great. They were so happy, and everyone around them could tell they were in love. Wendy and Danae ended up having 2 children, Gabriel and Anna. At this point, they decided it was time to pack up and move on. Wendy enrolled at the University of Saskatchewan and was working towards getting her teaching degree just like her parents. Danae found a job in a hospital as a janitor. The Rattays spent a lot of time together whenever they could. They would go on trips as a family together. They would pick berries, they would garden, play board and card games, and they were described as the perfect little family. Anna was definitely a daddy's girl, and Danae became her rock. He was calm and patient. He would rather take a walk in the woods by himself than go to a social event. He was also extremely protective over Wendy and his children. He loved them so much. Gabriel, on the other hand, was closer to Wendy. She was very nurturing as a mother, and she wanted Anna and Gabriel to have emotional stability in their lives, which was something that she'd always struggled with. She loved her job, and she worked with children. She wanted to teach children how to help themselves, how to speak up and be heard. She even organized a peace project at one point where she taught students about conflict resolution and about respect. After Wendy received her teaching degree, the Rattay family bought a property in rural British Columbia, right outside of Prince George. Danae found a job in McBride, and this is also in British Columbia, and he was working in a lumber mill. Wendy found work as a substitute teacher at the local high school where she was counseling unemployed individuals. Her experience was about to come in handy because Danae was about to lose his job. Things had not been going well for a while. Ever since Wendy became the breadwinner of the family, the balance of power shifted. Danae began to harbor resentment towards Wendy. He wasn't making a steady paycheck anymore. He wasn't enjoying his work. Wendy, on the other hand, saw no limits on what she could do. When she was growing up, she was immersed in music, theater, and art. So she was into all kinds of things, from natural healing remedies, using herbs, to living on the land and just being a free spirit and trying to find world peace. She had always been a dreamer. She spent a lot of time in her head, having a wild imagination, and one could say she wasn't very well grounded, no matter how stable her life seemed. She was always jumping from one trend to the next. One day, she would be telling her friends and family that she was a vegan or no longer consuming dairy products. And then the next week, she was trying some kind of a new vitamin regimen or routine. But that's not all. Some of the things Wendy was into went beyond the norm. She believed in the supernatural. She believed she could call upon ghosts and summon them. And this is also when she summoned Shauna. Remember Shauna? Wendy's alter ego. Wendy would call her children to come around the table, and she would have them hold hands and participate in seances. This is how Wendy would turn into Shauna. It was as if the spirit would come into her body. When this happened, she would take on a completely different personality. She did not seem to want to be Wendy. She didn't seem to want Wendy's life. She didn't want kids or a husband. She wanted to escape and to be free. This must have been very hard to comprehend as a child. Danae was so patient and so kind to her because he loved Wendy so much. He was the one who could handle her, talk her down, bring her back from Shauna to Wendy again and again. When this shift happened, he would calmly take her away, remove her from the seance, put her in a quiet bedroom, and talk to her for hours until she would come back to Earth. Since she refused to seek help or to get on medication, this was the only method that seemed to work for her, and Danae obliged. But no matter how many times he would try to help her, Shauna would come back. Soon, Danae was the one that was going to need help from Wendy. He was about to have a life-changing event. While he was at work one day in 1995, he got injured. He slipped on a deck that was wet from the snow, and a log hit his shoulder. It caused him to get knocked out unconscious. No one was there to see exactly what happened, but because of this accident, Danae was left with nerve damage down the right side of his body and severe back pain, which only got worse with time. Although he tried to return to work, he just couldn't perform the same physical activities and this demanding job that he once did. To his credit, Danae did try to find other jobs, but he was 45 years old, he did not know how to read or write, and he could no longer perform physically demanding work. So there were not many options left for him. Danae applied for workers' compensation, and it was now up to Wendy and Wendy alone to provide for their family. It's sad because Danae felt lost. He was 45 years old without a career, no real purpose, nothing to do but sit at home feeling as though he can't contribute like he used to. And that can definitely wear on your self-esteem. However, Wendy and Danae loved each other. They would still look at each other with these loving eyes, and they never even fought. Even though Wendy was a very passionate person when she believed in something and she would fight for it, she believed in being peaceful and loving, even through tough times. Wendy told the family that they were going to be just fine. They were going to make this work and be together forever. But it was less than a month later when their life would be ripped apart. On August 18th, 1997, Danae and Wendy headed out the door. They told their son Gabriel, who was standing in the kitchen, that they were going to run some errands. After lunch, the phone rang at home and Anna answered it. It was her father, and he was calling to ask if she or Gabriel had heard from Wendy, and Anna said, "No, we haven't." He told Anna that Wendy had dropped him off before picking up a few things she needed from downtown, and then she was supposed to go to tutor a student, then meet up with a friend of hers, come back, and pick him up at the hardware store around 1:30. But she never showed up. Anna told her father that she had not heard anything from her mother, and as soon as they got off the phone, she began making phone calls. She called the police, and they just told her that Wendy could not be reported missing until she had been gone for over 24 hours. So instead, she called up the friend that Wendy was supposed to be with, and then she called up the girl that she was supposed to tutor, and they let her know that Wendy hadn't showed up to either place. Wendy was not the type of person to show up late or at all when she had plans, so it was definitely not like her to miss these appointments, especially the tutoring lesson, because she took her job very seriously. This made Anna increasingly concerned. The family continued to wait all evening, and they were staring at the door, anticipating Wendy just walking back through it at any time. As it started to get darker out, Danae decided to go back into town with Anna in the family's old truck and look for her. When Wendy and Danae would normally go into town, they would go to a coffee shop or Tim Hortons. So Danae decided to drive to those places to see if she was there. It was at that time that Anna looked over and saw the family's white Plymouth Voyager parked under a streetlight in a nearby grocery store parking lot. She noticed that it looked like the grocery store was just closing up, so she ran in, hoping that maybe she would catch her mom inside. However, the doors were already closed, and when she knocked, they told her that there were no customers inside. Anna and her dad went back and they examined the van. And that's when they noticed there was a dent in the side that they didn't think had been there before. And that was interesting because they thought this might have been foul play. Someone could have taken her. There could have been a struggle. The dent was made in the car. They took her away. But there was just no sign of anything like that. There was nothing around except for that dent that would make them believe anything like that happened. Danae had a spare key, and they did not notice anything different on the inside of the van, so they ended up deciding to have Anna drive the van home. When they got home, Anna continued to make calls. She called all of her friends, all of Wendy's friends, and eventually everyone in Wendy's entire directory, but not one single person had seen or heard from her. The next day, the Rattays reported Wendy missing with the RCMP. That's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They created a missing persons poster that they could hang around town. It had a picture of Wendy along with information to describe her, and it read, "Last seen in the area of 15th and Spruce Street, Prince George, on Monday, August 18th, 1997. It continued with, "Wendy is a Caucasian, 44-year-old woman, 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 155 pounds, brown hair, hazel eyes, and wears glasses. When she was last seen, she was wearing a blue-green blouse, blue jeans, and carrying a purse." Anna spent the next week diligently putting up the missing persons posters. The waiting was hard on everyone, especially Danae. He could not sit still. He just couldn't do much of anything. He would frequently take these long walks in the woods, and Anna eventually saw him break down and get emotional for the first time during this time. The longer that Wendy stayed missing, the bigger the news became around Prince George, and the more people learned of this case, the more speculations came about where she could be or what had possibly happened to her. Early on in the investigation, police focused on Danae, which isn't surprising to most people, including his own sister, who told him that he needed to get used to all the attention. Because according to her, 99% of the time, the husband is the one who did it. His sister discouraged him when police asked him to take a lie detector test, but he agreed to take one anyway. Detective Judy Thomas, the lead investigator into Wendy's disappearance, said that Danae was nervous when he came in to take the test. But he wasn't more nervous than most people are. It's just that nobody knows exactly how to take a polygraph test or how they work. The polygraph operator asked Danae directly if he had anything to do with Wendy's disappearance, and he said, "No, I did not." The results showed that Danae had not been deceptive when he was answering the question, and he was eliminated as a suspect. There still weren't any real leads in this case. So what happened to Wendy? Detective Thomas then decided that she needed to focus her sights on the other major theories and rumors that had been floating around Prince George. Highway 16, more commonly known as the Highway of Tears, is a highway that extends about 450 miles between Prince Rupert and Prince George, British Columbia. When Wendy went missing that August of 1997, 15 women had either gone missing or had been found dead along that highway. People suspected that there may have been a serial killer in the area, and because Wendy's van was found relatively close to that highway, speculation began to stir about whether or not these cases were related and that she could have been another one of these victims. Detective Thomas looked into this lead, of course, but only briefly. That was because Wendy did not fit the demographic of the many other individuals that had gone missing or been found along the highway. Many of these women were young. They were in their 20s, and they were either hitchhikers, involved in drugs or organized crime, or they were sex workers. Wendy just did not fit into that mold. Another theory that Detective Thomas looked into was the possibility that perhaps Wendy's wandering spirit had taken back over her, and maybe she ran away from her family. Her sister Karen said that it wouldn't have surprised her if she just up and left her husband and children because she had left her family once before when she was younger. She said that Wendy just couldn't comprehend how doing these things hurt the people that loved her. The Greyhound bus station was only a couple blocks from the grocery store that her family found her van. Gabriel went down there and he put one of the missing persons posters out of Wendy, and then he asked a woman working there if she had recognized Wendy. The woman actually told Gabriel that she did, and in fact, she was certain that she had seen Wendy sitting at a table at the bus station, and that's very interesting. This was the type of lead that they needed at this time. It's also the story that Wendy's family believed was true, that Wendy took off because she wanted to vanish. She wanted freedom. She wanted to be Shauna more than Wendy, especially because her episodes had been getting worse over the years. They were harder to control without medication or therapy. Danae was finding it so hard to deal with these mood swings and the personality switches. I feel like it's hard to keep one relationship together and to have to work with two dueling personalities and not being able to get through to the person you love would be very frustrating. Wendy was kind, she was patient, compassionate, and loving, and Shauna was not. Shauna was the opposite of all of those things. Her personality seemed to become darker and darker over time. Wendy's family just assumed that she vanished once again on her own volition. She had done it to her family growing up, so why not her family now? She had left everyone behind when she was 17. Therefore, they believed she could 100% leave her husband and children behind without a doubt. But why? Why would her own family feel so strongly about this? It was because she so easily took herself out of her family's lives when she was growing up, which really left a mark on them, especially her older sister, Karen. Karen wanted to protect her, and nobody felt like they could do anything. Wendy left all the people that loved her and cared about her, even all of the people she called friends. With this track record in mind, they believed that she would have no problem leaving everyone behind again. But there were other reasons why people who knew her best thought this could be true. Anna began looking through her mom's papers. She was looking for some kind of sign or clue about where her mom might be or what could have happened. And that's when she ended up finding an application for a teaching position in California. This definitely surprised her. Her mother had never told her or anyone else about applying for this position. And after all, Anna was from the United States. She was not from Canada. Maybe she truly did want to start over. Detective Thomas, when searching the family's home early in the disappearance, also found Wendy's passport was missing. And her family knew that she had also been involved in this religious group at one point. And this group called themselves the Emissaries of Divine Light. Sounds right up her alley with the spirituality and everything. Wendy was always bouncing from different religions, and she was just searching for her place to belong. And she could have possibly been discontent because of her duality. This church group also had several branches in the United States, which continued to play into this theory that perhaps she left her family in search of something else. Maybe a way that she could be more of Shauna and less of Wendy. I told you that I was very curious about Shauna. I wanted to understand how someone could actually clinically be diagnosed with having two real people inside one brain. So I looked into split personalities, which is dissociative identity disorder. It's a medical disorder where a person has two or more distinct personalities. I'm a Gemini, and sometimes people say that about me. This is different. The thoughts, the actions, and the behaviors of each personality may be completely opposite. Trauma usually causes this condition, particularly during childhood. I couldn't find any information about Wendy's early childhood other than what I already told you. She grew up in a middle-class family with two parents that were teachers, but it does make me think about it because 90% of people who suffer with this condition dealt with childhood trauma. And there's so many things that can be considered trauma to us that wouldn't necessarily look traumatic to someone else. And Wendy had already been running away from home as a teenager, so there must have been something or someone that she was running from. If it was that easy for her to leave her parents, doesn't it make you think that she wasn't happy being with them? I could be totally wrong. I'm assuming here. But what about the fact that they put her away in an institution instead of being patient with her the way Danae was? I understand that many of us are not equipped to handle disorders, and sometimes it's safer and better to leave that care up to someone professional. However, it was just a perspective that I explored, considering that she was suffering from having these two personalities. Whether we understand it or not, having split personalities is a real thing. What's scary is that the alternate personality can take over a person's mind, at least for a temporary amount of time. The original personality or the host personality is still there, but it begins to take more of a passive role, and it's more of a backseat driver letting the alternate personality take control. Get this, the host may not even be aware that the other personality exists in them, which makes it very difficult for them to get treatment, and that terrifies me, but I also found it interesting and could be connected to what might have happened to Wendy. When this personality shifts, the new personality has its own identity, completely separate from the host. This means that Shauna would have her own history, her own age, mood, memories, vocabulary, behavior, even a different belief system. Shauna may not even like Wendy's husband or her children or lifestyle. So it's really not that hard to believe Shauna could have been slowly taking over, which finally led Wendy to be forced to leave so that Shauna could live out her own dreams. In the past couple of years before her disappearance, Danae had seen more darker sides to Shauna, and there were things that he became very uncomfortable with. Shauna would talk about how she wanted to take people's spirits from them. She would discuss sexual acts and other things that he did not think were appropriate. Yet Danae still tried to be patient with Wendy because he knew she wasn't purposely exposing Shauna's perversions. After all, Wendy and Danae had been together for almost 2 decades at this time. Anna was only 17, yet one of the most dedicated family members looking for her mother. She wouldn't stop checking in with detectives and doing her own investigating. Meanwhile, Detective Thomas looked into all of these factors to see if Wendy had just left on her own accord. She spoke to the woman that Gabriel had said he spoke to, but this time she claimed that she couldn't say whether it was Wendy that she had seen at the bus station. Detectives also flagged bank accounts, credit cards, social security numbers, and they put Wendy on a Canada-wide database. They also checked airlines and border crossings, and they found nothing. Detective Thomas looked into that religious group and their branches, and they once again found nothing. The detective wanted to get a better understanding of Wendy, so she took to interviewing some of the people that knew Wendy best. She interviewed Wendy's mother, asking about her teenage years and the times that she ran away. She also interviewed some of Wendy's closest friends. After speaking with these individuals, Detective Thomas concluded that she didn't think that Wendy would leave her family because her friends would say over and over again that Wendy was first and foremost a mother and she would have never left her children behind. Detective Thomas also emphasized that there was something very different about a rebellious teen running away from her family than a grown woman with a family, a husband, and children just leaving everything behind. The last major theory that Detective Thomas had to look into was the most talked about and perhaps the most credible of all the theories: the Jones family. The Jones family were neighbors of the Rattays, and just 4 months before Wendy's disappearance, she had complained about them publicly in a local newspaper. Yeah, she went off and she claimed that the Joneses had been mistreating their animals and that they had basically used their land as a garbage dump. I'm a pet mama, and I would be very upset if someone tried to get my animals taken away from me. And this story had garnered so much attention that the city did end up acting upon it. The family was kicked off of their property and they had their animals taken from them. That's a lot. That's a lot to handle. And who knows what that would cause someone to do. It had been alleged that the Joneses had made threats to the Rattays, and at one point, the wife of the Jones family sent a letter to the local paper talking crap about Wendy and the Rattays, and she purposely spelled the name Rattay to rat. So instead of R-A-T-T-E-S, she said they were the rats, R-A-T-S. Kind of childish, but still. Gabriel also stated that his mother had felt threatened by the Joneses and that they would shout and scream at Wendy whenever they would pass by. So this was not a good relationship. Detective Thomas looked into this theory as she had with every other. And there had been one particular member of the Jones family that was speculated to be the one who may have done something to Wendy. This individual, however, wasn't even around the area anymore. And there was nothing else that detectives could find that supported the theory. And these detectives, especially Detective Thomas, were just at a loss at this point. Every theory couldn't be substantiated, and the case essentially seemed to come to a dead end. Gabriel, Anna, and Danae had to try to go on with their lives. 3 years after Wendy disappeared, Gabriel moved to Vancouver and he enrolled in college. Keeping busy helped him deal with the pain. He wasn't able to yet get over his mom's disappearance. And in class one day, Gabriel had a mental breakdown. It was terrible, and he ended up quitting school. Anna was living with her boyfriend hundreds of miles away from Prince George, but she still kept in contact with detectives because she was determined to keep her mother's case alive. Danae went about his own life as well. However, he seemed to be struggling the most. He lost everything. His beautiful, loving wife, his partner, the person that he loved the most. She was also the support system, and without her, he had no way to live financially. She was the backbone of the family. Now his kids were growing up and they were gone too. He really didn't have a traditional way to make ends meet, so sadly, like many other people who are desperate in these situations, he turned to crime. He was desperate for money, and this included drug dealing, which ended up getting him arrested. Lucky for him, he only ended up getting probation because it was his first offense. Unfortunately, he did end up losing the family's home, and he had no other choice but to live in a really cheap apartment in a bad part of town. He was collecting bottles just to be able to eat. When Anna did get the chance to see or speak to her dad on the phone, she could tell that he changed entirely. He went from a calm, patient, steady man to an angry, emotional mess. And she thought for a while it was grief over Wendy's disappearance that had caused this change in him, everything that he'd been through. But then a different thought came to her mind. Maybe it wasn't grief that her father was suffering from. Maybe it was guilt. She had this overwhelming gut feeling that he was hiding something. While diligently working to find answers to her mother's disappearance, Anna uncovered another side to the perfect family that she once believed she had. Anna couldn't give time to that at that moment because through all of the sadness, there was some light in her life. In 2002, she was marrying her longtime boyfriend, Eric. It was hard for Anna to walk down that aisle in her beautiful dress and not get to see her mother smiling back at her. But she knew she had to hold it together on her special day. It was as difficult as it was special because of Danae's attitude. You would imagine this being one of the happiest days of his life, watching his only daughter get married to the man that she loved. But he wasn't impressed. He wasn't keen on the fact that Eric was 16 years older than Anna. He thought they were mismatched, and he was completely detached at the wedding until a song came on. A song that Anna picked for her first dance. It was her parents' song, and this upset Danae, and rightfully so. He got so emotional, he just wanted to leave, and this is understandable in one way because it's his daughter's wedding. And yet, she chooses to use this song, and was it appropriate? Maybe. It's something special to her, and it's her choice. But at the same time, all of these emotions just started to bubble up in him. Anna let it slide because emotions were running high, and this was the very first happy get-together since Wendy had gone missing. And it was though the family didn't even remember how to be happy, but they tried. 5 years later, however, Anna changed her tune. It was on the 10th anniversary of Wendy's disappearance that Anna decided to dig deeper and act on her suspicions about her father. As Anna asked family and friends about Danae, she found out that he became bitter when the family moved, and this was at the time he had to leave his job as a miner. This job he had as a miner was his best paying job that he ever had and he ever would have. He truly resented the fact that he had to leave. You may have also forgotten about Danae's first love. It's what brought him and Wendy together in the first place: gambling. Well, even though he was no longer working at the mines, he didn't stop gambling. And it started to become more and more of a burden on his family than just a fun pastime of Danae's. He wasn't a young, carefree guy hanging out in Reno anymore. He had children and responsibilities, while Wendy was out working hard to try to keep everything together, to keep their family from falling apart. Wendy didn't care about his gambling at first. She even tried to set limits with him. She told him that he needed to be smart. He had to avoid playing any big money or taking big, risks on poker games, especially because after Danae got hurt, they no longer had any extra money that they could afford Danae to use and just gamble away. To him, he felt as if he were good enough to hit big and he wanted to contribute financially again. But this meant he had to risk a lot of money that the family couldn't afford to potentially lose. Even though Wendy was known as a very loving, patient person, she did become angry at one point when she found out that Danae had a secret $500 put away for gambling. Another time, after he'd been hurt and out of work, Danae was gambling and he went all in on a full house, only to be let down, and he lost nearly $10,000. Danae continued his gambling even after the incident when he lost that money. Wendy gave him several hundreds of dollars to get some dental work done, and he never ended up getting it. No. Anna had also given him money at one point to use for him and Wendy's anniversary to help them go out and celebrate, but he never ended up doing anything. And both of these times, they found out he gambled the money away. Wendy had to confide in someone, so she started speaking to her close friends and family about Danae's gambling addiction and the fact that she had been considering leaving. She even told them she brought up a conversation with Danae about possibly having an open relationship and even a sexual relationship she wanted to have with a woman. This was something that Shauna had actually brought up when Wendy was having an episode. So this technically wasn't Wendy's idea, but she still brought it up to Danae, and I don't know how that made him feel. Wendy was already having trouble taking care of herself, and more of her struggles started to be uncovered when detectives looked further into her disappearance. Anna told him that when she was growing up, she noticed her mom would have these mood swings. Some days she would be really happy, and then other days it seemed as though her world was completely falling apart. In reality, it was something much bigger, and we know that. Anna did not know anything about Wendy's alter ego because Danae shielded his children from the truth. Danae's sister spoke about these mood swings of Wendy's, and she said that she first noticed them when Anna and Gabriel were children. She said that one moment Wendy would be extremely gentle and soft-spoken with her children, and then only minutes later, she would be cold and abrupt with them. Danae would notice the shift in Wendy almost immediately, so he helped Wendy hide it. Whenever he took her away to another room or out of the house, away from everyone, she would come back and be completely normal. Danae's family eventually asked him what was going on with Wendy, and that's when he finally told them that it wasn't Wendy, it was Shauna. Danae said that Wendy told him about Shauna not long after the two had gotten married. So he had known all along, but not until they got married. So that's interesting. It's almost like, don't let him know until you lock him down. But he wasn't the only person that had known about this other side of Wendy. Wendy's sister Karen said she had met Shauna in the past as well. Karen said she was supposed to meet up with Wendy one day, and when Wendy showed up, she was not herself at all. She showed up in this expensive car, and she was bragging about how much money she was making, and she wasn't interested in anything about Wendy. Karen claims that it was at that point that Wendy told her she was no longer Wendy anymore. She claimed she was Shauna, and she was magical. She described Shauna as this ancient spirit called Doshana. Danae's sister said that Wendy refused to get help with these issues, and just a month before her disappearance, she had left and taken the kids to visit an old friend of hers named Lois. Of course, they tracked down Lois, and Lois said that while Wendy was there, she confided in her. Wendy told her about Danae's struggle finding a job, as well as his gambling addiction, and how it was really hard on her. She also told her about leaving him. And she said she knew she had to make that decision about whether or not she was going to stay with him. She also started to be more vocal with her children about leaving with their father. She told Anna that she loved Danae, but she was angry with him and she wasn't sure she would ever be able to forgive him. She also told Anna that Danae's addiction was ruining them. Wendy decided to go as far as changing the bank accounts into her name because she felt like Danae wasn't able to control himself and wouldn't be able to protect the family's money. When Wendy went back home, she did sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation with Danae. She later called Lois and told her that their conversation went well and that they were going to give it another try. But she emphasized that this was the last time. This was the last chance she was going to give him. Lois said that Wendy sounded relieved and extremely happy on the phone. Anna said that Danae had been bothered by what Wendy told him, and especially the way that she had told other people about their marriage issues and Danae's gambling issues. Anna knew that her father was a proud man, and it bothered him that his dirty laundry had essentially been aired to so many people. When Danae was questioned by police, however, he maintained that his marriage was back on track and that everything was good. However, she did go missing the same exact day he received his final rejection notice on his worker compensation claim. I was thinking perhaps Wendy was at her breaking point. Maybe she didn't want to take responsibility for all this. Maybe this is what triggered Shauna to appear, and maybe she really did leave on her own to start a new life. Her family could have been better without her in her mind. However, detectives had always had another suspicion. Danae. From the beginning, they thought he could be involved. Detective Thomas had interviewed him 3 times in the first few days after Wendy's disappearance. When she did, she noticed that his answers would change, especially when it came to vital facts in the case. Originally, when he was interviewed by detectives, Danae told them that Wendy had no money whenever she dropped him off and left that day. But then in a follow-up statement, he claimed that he had given her more than $2,000. Detectives also said that Danae never seemed overly concerned or distraught about Wendy's disappearance, even in the early days. However, you've probably heard this before, everybody grieves differently. About a month into the disappearance, Danae had also been caught on a bank surveillance camera. He was cashing unemployment checks of Wendy's at an ATM. But he'd been honest with detectives about this. He told them that their family didn't have any money coming in since Wendy was gone. He needed money from those checks in order to pay the bills. But all of this information was dismissed once Danae passed the polygraph and when the other theories were starting to be investigated. Plus, it made perfect sense. They were married. It's not as though he was stealing a stranger's money. He truly wasn't able to go on without that assistance, even if it wasn't legal or it wasn't the right thing to do. He was that desperate. As the years passed, Anna stayed focused on the case, making sure that others did as well. She did not want the police or the public to forget about this case. She went out of her way to make sure they didn't. So at one point, she went to Frank Peebles. He's a reporter from the Prince George Citizen. He had been covering this case from the beginning. She came in with a folder of newspaper clippings and potential leads in her mother's case. She sat down and told Frank that she felt as though her father was probably involved in whatever happened to her mother. Anna had gone to Danae one day after detectives had told her that he kept changing his story, and she asked him exactly what he had done that day, trying to get a timeline from him. Not only was he not willing to give it to her, but he got angry and he told her he wasn't talking about Wendy's disappearance anymore. And if she needed to know what his timeline of events was for that day, she could just go ask the police. This could look suspicious, but it could also truly be frustrating. They hadn't even found a body this entire time, so it really did look as though she ran off. If that was the case, it wouldn't be wrong for a husband to be angry as much as he may want her back. Even though Anna felt as if the case had been cold, investigators had actually been putting a lot of work behind the scenes, and they had the same suspicion as Anna, that her dad, Danae, had been responsible for her mother's disappearance. Or maybe they just wanted to solve the case and truly had no other leads. In 2007, Detective Thomas decided to pass the case off to the Unsolved Homicide Unit, who she felt could potentially do more with Wendy's case. Ron Barrett was now in charge of the case. He had been the lead investigator of the Unsolved Homicide Unit. He too felt that Danae was responsible for whatever happened to Wendy. He thought he had a way he could prove it. A sting operation that they called Mr. Big. The Unsolved Homicide Unit was used to coming up with these elaborate undercover operations. They actually had completed 350 of them where they would, and tell me what you think about this, they would create a fake criminal organization from scratch, and they would have officers pose as criminals. And remember, Danae is a desperate man who has already been caught up in crime to survive. In June 2008, an undercover officer met with Danae in Prince George. He told him that he was looking for someone to help him with a job, but he didn't know his way around town. Danae, without question, agreed to help him. And a week later, this same officer asked Danae if he wanted to make some extra money delivering bags with unknown contents in them. And Danae agreed. In no time, he was a fully functioning member of what he believed was a criminal gang. He thought he was helping to smuggle illegal cigarettes and alcohol and exchange stolen diamonds and transport guns. Do you blame him? The man can't read or write. He lost his wife. His kids are gone. His daughter thinks he's responsible for their mother's disappearance. Life was tough. I really think he didn't believe he had anything to lose and at least money to gain. He even went as far as threatening a man at one point and standing ground at a hotel door while he believed that the gang members were brutally beating a woman on the inside. He made about $12,000 in a few months that he had been involved in this group that was actually undercover cops. And this made him proud of himself again. Parts of the old Danae started to show up. Gabriel said that around this time, his dad visited him in Vancouver. And it was as though his dad was back. The old Danae was back. But little did Gabriel know that his dad was only in Vancouver to make what he believed to be an illegal delivery, and that it was his criminal group that had brought this old Danae back. 3 months into this undercover operation, Danae was right where detectives wanted him to be, and they were ready to get the actual police involved again. Detectives contacted Danae, and they told him that the investigation into Wendy's disappearance had been reopened and that he was the prime suspect. And this was part of the ruse because they wanted him to feel afraid that something was going to happen to him because they had to force him toward the criminals in the gang to assist him in getting away or helping to prove he didn't do anything. They also informed him that all those years ago, he had actually failed that polygraph test. This was a little suspicious to me personally. Polygraphs aren't reliable as it is, but to kind of bait and switch him like that irked me. It was fine enough back then when he first took the polygraph for police to give up and move on to other potential theories. But now that they don't have anything to run with after all these years, it turns out he actually failed the polygraph back then. With no one else to turn to, Dene turned to the only people he had, the undercover officers that he believed to be his criminal friends, and he hoped that they would know how to help him or know someone who could. This is when they told him about Mr. Big, the fake gang leader of this criminal organization who apparently called all the shots. Mr. Big, supposedly, was known for being able to make your criminal problems disappear. Only if, though, he liked you. And he wanted, and this is important to me, he wanted you to become an official member of their organization. So if he liked you, number one, and if he wanted you to become part of this criminal organization, then he would help you. Keep that in mind. The main things that they made sure to tell Dene about Mr. Big, however, was that you had to be honest with him. Up until that point, Dene had repeated the same story over and over again. He'd been repeating it for decades to the undercover officers whenever they asked him about Wendy, but they hoped that when he faced Mr. Big, he would tell them the truth, I'm like putting in air quotes, the truth that he was really responsible for what happened to Wendy. They didn't want to just prove that Dene had been responsible for what happened to Wendy, but they also wanted to find the truth if he wasn't responsible. I really think he was caught between a rock and a hard place. And the police had put him there. He was completely desperate. He was at the mercy of this fake criminal organization. And he knew the story that he had been giving them up until this point wasn't getting him anywhere. It definitely wasn't getting him out of trouble or out of being a prime suspect. So on September 27th, 2008, Rob Barrett sat in a hotel room monitoring a video feed from a nearby room where Dene was meeting with who he believed was Mr. Big. Early into the conversation, something different happened. Mr. Big told Dene that he would have to come clean about his past and about his wife's disappearance, and if he had known anything about it or been involved in any way, because that was the only way he was going to help him and possibly want him to be a part of this gang.
I'll be honest with you, okay? Right now, I haven't decided if I'm going to help you or I'm not going to help you. Right now, I want to see who are you as a person.
This is when Dene, after 11 years of repeating almost the exact same story, switched things up completely. Why? Well, there could be two reasons. One, he so badly wanted to be part of this family, the family of this gang, which I talked about gangs in my very last video. I will link it up here in the cards. If you want to watch that, it was all about MS-13 and it was very interesting. I learned a lot. But it is a family and he didn't have one right now. So that could be one reason. And maybe he thought by looking more like a heartless criminal, this would build rapport. Or was it that he was about to drop a bombshell? The real truth. Dene told Mr. Big that he had never told anyone what he was about to tell him, but that he did it. That he was responsible for Wendy's disappearance, but not only that, her death. He told him that he hadn't been proud of what he did, but he was the one that did it. He said that everything had gone so perfectly, just as he planned. He had a rifle, and he fired one shot toward the back of her head. And then he began to further elaborate on what he did. And he told Mr. Big that when they went to leave that morning, Wendy stopped to feed the ducks. And that's when her back was toward him. He took out his .22 caliber, aimed, and fired. It appeared to all these undercover officers that 11 years worth of secrets were beginning to spill right out of Dene's mouth as he continued to talk to Mr. Big. He told Mr. Big that there hadn't been a lot of blood, and that after this, she fell to the ground, and he quickly wrapped her body in a black tarp. But wouldn't there be a lot of, I don't know, you tell me. Because I'm working on another case where I'm looking at crime scene evidence, and a head wound can definitely produce a lot of blood, but let's move on. He said he noticed that Wendy was still moving. That's when he took a tire iron and said he finished her off. He continued, telling Mr. Big that he put Wendy in her van. He made a left turn onto Highway 16 and drove to an abandoned loggers road about an hour and a half away, and that's where he put her body, into a swamp. Well, the cops want more. So they, apparently Mr. Big had to see exactly where all of this took place in order to believe this story. Really. These were police officers wanting more information to lock him up. The next day, Danae took 2 of the undercover officers that he believed, again, were his crime buddies, to the alleged crime scene, the supposed crime scene, where he dumped Wendy's body. And then they proceeded to tell him that they needed to make sure that there was no evidence left behind that police would discover at the swamp. So Danae had pointed to this tarp that was sticking out from the swamp, obviously saying that that was part of the crime scene. And the very next day, the undercover officers went back to the swamp to pick up this piece of tarp. They sent it to an analyst. What do you think? Could he have made all of this up? The part about the tooth and how he explained everything away, saying that, oh, she was inside the tarp, but then after searching, detectives found nothing there. And granted, this area was full of wildlife, bears and wolves, so they're carnivores. You can do the math. It had also been 11 years, and that's what I meant by doing the math. That's a long time. I actually found the audio from this recorded undercover conversation, and I want to play it for you right now.
Okay, so, you see right beside the house?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So after you shot her, what happened then?
I brought her more behind the garage, because that's where the tarp was.
Oh, you dragged her there?
Yeah. And
where did you back smash her with the jack? Because that is important, because there may be teeth or bone. You don't.
Yeah, okay, but she was wrapped up in the tarp when I did that.
So she was already wrapped. And then
Okay.
So you just shot the once, right?
Once. I don't believe in twice.
Okay.
With the neighbors.
What about the casing?
The casing is on a hard highway in the bush. So everything makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Everything.
Yeah.
What do you think? Does it sound like he's being honest? I tend to think skeptically. I think if this is a first-time killer, is he that good at committing a crime that he can hide a body that well without anyone seeing him? Nobody would look there. Wouldn't that be a typical place for someone to hide someone or something in the brush? Wouldn't detectives have canvassed all of these areas? I don't know. It was an hour and a half away. But I feel like they would know Highway 16 and they had been searching up and down it. I don't know. You tell me. I like to hear from you. He said that after this, he then drove back to Prince George, getting rid of the gun and Wendy's ID along the way. And that's when he left the white Plymouth Voyager in the grocery store parking lot. He claimed that he had just wandered around for a bit before he called Anna and told her that Wendy had never come to get him. He explained that he intentionally chose to bring Anna back with him around town that night to the coffee shop and to Tim Hortons so that she would be the one to discover the van. Even if Danae was what he thought was 100% sure that this was the right location, I can't even remember something I did yesterday, let alone something that happened 11 years ago in all of that brush. And then I thought about the fact that he would have to have the tarp ready, like she's bending down with the ducks, and then I don't know. A couple days after the Mr. Big operation, Anna received a phone call from the police asking that she come downtown. They sat her down and they informed her that they had arrested her father. Anna broke down when she heard the news. She felt like she had always known in her heart that this was what happened. When Gabriel was brought in, though, and he was told the same news, he reacted much differently than his sister Anna. Gabriel was like me and very skeptical. He didn't just believe that his father could have done this to his mother, and he was a little confused about the whole sting operation and how all that went down. It just skeptical. That's how he felt. And it made him confront his father. He demanded to know what happened. Danae looked at him and told him he did not do it, and Gabriel believed him. Then Gabriel told police that he was home, and he never heard any gunshot that day, especially where his dad claimed that it happened. There was no way that he wouldn't have heard something. Gabriel wasn't the only person that had been skeptical. When Gabriel contacted Wendy's family that lived in the United States and told them, they didn't believe it for a minute, especially Wendy's sister, Karen. She said that her family had always seen Danae as someone who would have died to protect his family, and they could never imagine him doing anything to hurt any one of them. Danae's sister was also skeptical and believed that her brother was innocent. There was no physical evidence, even around the area, and they had searched the outside of their home. They had done all the preliminary searches in that area. No body, no DNA, no physical evidence that any foul play had been involved. Even though they had searched the area that Danae had brought them to, and the analyst came back with inconclusive evidence of the tarp, they still arrested him. Danae even told his sister he made up the story about what he did to Wendy because he just wanted the investigation into him to stop. And if he didn't come up with something to tell Mr. Big, then they weren't going to be able to help him. He also told her that he lied during the undercover operation. He told these officers at one point that he killed a man with rat poison, even though it turned out this man died of natural causes. Gabriel and Danae's sister believed that Danae felt like he belonged somewhere for the very first time in a long time, and that he would have said anything so that he wouldn't lose that. When asked what the reason was that he would kill Wendy when he made this confession to Mr. Big, it made everyone confused. He said that on the day he killed her, he knew that her alter ego, Shauna, was about to do something sexually inappropriate to Anna, and that he couldn't let that happen, so he wanted to get rid of Shauna, and in order to get rid of Shauna, he had to get rid of his wife, Wendy. I don't know. Although Dennis's supporters often used Mr. Big's sting to discredit the arrest, saying that, of course, he just told Mr. Big what he thought he wanted to hear, Danae actually confessed a second time. This time, knowing that he was speaking to an actual officer. After Danae was arrested, he was read his rights, then shown a video of him confessing undercover to Mr. Big. And he did initially deny what he said that day. He said, no, I didn't do it. I didn't kill her. And he denied it for almost an hour. Then police decided that they needed to show him a video that they'd recorded of Gabriel, where Gabriel had told them that he just wanted his father to tell the truth. I don't know about you, but some of these police tactics really bother me. You are pulling at this man's heartstrings. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he's guilty or not. But nonetheless, it's just interesting that they're allowed to use all these tactics. And I understand why they do it, because a lot of times it works. We catch the right person, but then there's times we don't. And he sat there for a few minutes after watching that video of his son, and that's when he started to repeat the same confession that he had given to Mr. Big. He told the officer, listen, she didn't suffer. And he told the officer that he had cried when he did it. But he did confirm everything that he said to Mr. Big in that hotel room. He said it's all true.
Tu te souviens-tu où est-ce que tu l'as tiré? Dans la tête?
Ben oui, quand on me suit, puis c'est balle de même.
In December of 2010, the trial began for the murder of Wendy Rattay. Anna had been the only member of the family that wasn't standing by her father. He pled not guilty, and he recanted both of his confessions. Danae's defense attorney's main argument had been that there was no physical evidence, and that Danae had lied about all of the things he said to Mr. Big and the undercover detectives. So why should his confession be taken as the truth? Gabriel had been only one of 2 witnesses that took the stand for the defense. After a 4-week trial, the jury only took 2 hours to find Danae Rattay guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life. As Anna left the courtroom after her father's sentencing, her father turned to her and said, "Keep looking for your mother. To me, it could have looked, I don't know if the word's endearing, but to Anna, she was offended by the statement. She just wanted him to admit everything. She felt it was very selfish for him to say that to her, especially after all the time that she had put into looking for her mother from age 17 to 27, practically her entire life. Gabriel, on the other hand, is now a father himself to his own little girl, and he's allowed her to meet his father. But as of the Dateline interviews with the family, he had yet to let his sister Anna meet his daughter. Gabriel still believes that Wendy could be out there somewhere. As much as Anna is happy to finally have justice, she really does hope that she can have a relationship with her brother again. Even Wendy's family stood by Danae. They said that he was always there to protect her, and that in the United States, this outcome was not likely to ever happen. There was not enough evidence to prove he did anything except lie to the police because of their deceptive sting operation and his desperation to belong to something. He had nothing to lose. His children had totally different perspectives about their father, and this was apparent in their victim impact statements. Gabriel, who was 29 at the time, pleaded for leniency. However, Anna, through tears, said this: he deserves to spend the rest of his life in a self-made hell. She went on to say he was self-centered and a lowlife who was full of deceit and clearly committed the act beyond a reasonable doubt. She said, "I cannot understand why murder was chosen over divorce." Anna said she lost everything. The ability for her mom to see her graduate from high school and to be at her wedding or give her motherly advice throughout the rest of her life. And I can understand that. She told the court that she went from an idealistic free spirit who loved life with great passion and optimism to an emotionally crippled human being who has trust issues, health issues, and fear. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. Even if her father was not responsible, it wouldn't change that. But she still referred to him as a two-faced liar, bringing up the fact that he had that secret gambling life with his scumbag buddies that he loved so much that he stole money from his own family, from Anna, from her mother, from Gabriel. And he took that money on the pretext of buying his wife an anniversary gift only to spend it on gambling. He was just like his father. He stole money from his family the way his own father did from his. It was just history repeating itself. And she went on to explain that she still stuck up for him after he was caught selling hard drugs. And now she doesn't know how she could have been so blind. She said he's where he belongs, even if he didn't murder her mother. That's how much it seems like she hates her father. I honestly kept wondering if there was something more to what happened to her, something more to her childhood, why she harbored what seems like so much hatred toward him. Both children have changed their last names, probably to avoid the stigma that their father's last name brings. Gabriel was conflicted on what he believed. He doesn't want to lose his father because he already lost his mother, and until they find a body or can confirm that his father did this, he's not pushing him out of his life. Gabriel said, "He has been a great father to me before and after my mom disappeared." And this convinced him that he would not be a risk for reoffending. He went on to say that he had no idea his father recanted the allegation about being worried that Wendy's alter ego was hurting Anna once he was under oath. He said, "No, I just said that that's not true." Gabriel didn't know that. And that made him believe even more that his father didn't do this. There was just an update about this case last year in September 2021. This is when Danae was denied for day patrol. Under Canadian law, it's a form of release where you can participate in public activities during the day, and then you have to return every night to either a prison or a halfway house. His behavior in prison was satisfactory, and he had been accepted into a halfway house in Lower Mainland before he got denied the day patrol. So that would have been great for him. But the court panel remained concerned. They said that after the murder, he was convicted and sentenced on that trafficking-related charge. And this indicated to them that his involvement in criminal activity was likely greater than what his record showed, and that he was entrenched in this criminal attitude, and that's why he wanted to be part of the gang with Mr. Big. The panel said, your file states that you have little insight or understanding into your actions. Further reports indicate you are very comfortable playing the victim role and blaming everyone but yourself. You have accepted little responsibility for your offending behavior by way of victim empathy. And the panel went on to say that he had not participated in any programs or other interventions to challenge his problematic thinking patterns and behaviors that contributed to his offenses. And this was his drug-related offenses. Overall, the board remains highly concerned that he would be a violent offender with risk factors because he was unwilling or unable to challenge his persistent cognitive distortions related to his role in the crimes he committed and continued to point blame at others. This case, to me anyway, is still somewhat of an unsolved mystery. What do you think happened? Do you think justice has been served? Do you believe that he's innocent or guilty? I usually don't do unsolved cases. This is technically a solved case, but it's one that really interested me, and I hope you enjoyed watching. I just want to thank all of you for watching today. Thank you so much for subscribing if you have. If you haven't, I would really appreciate that. Thank you for all of your comments, and thank you for coming back every week to watch another one of my videos. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.